Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
that looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
For something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. Fewer Americans vote in elections than in most other Western democracies. A Pew Research study ranked U.S. voter participation 31st out of 35 Western democracies. It attributed that lack of participation to restrictive voting laws and manipulation of voting districts, which have continued to increase this year. Analysts have called current efforts to eliminate, reduce, or manipulate voting as effectively gagging American citizens, preventing their ability to influence their future and that of their children. In this episode of Challenge 2.0, we speak with leaders from the League of Women Voters of Washington, a group that has a long history in effectively confronting threats to voting rights. So we are very fortunate to have two leading representatives of the League of Women Voters of Washington State. Karen Crowley, you're the president of the League of Women Voters in Washington.
Yes, my honor.
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And Allison McCaffrey, and you are the chair of both the Democracy Issue and then also Redistricting Commission Reform Task Force, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us also. Give us a little background. I think no one who is of the age of voting or even having taken civics, political science, etc., cannot know the League of Women Voters. But give us a little background on that. How did it come to be?
It is a 78-year history of extraordinary activism. Really, the League began in 1848 with a gathering at Seneca Falls, and you may have heard about this. And they actually wrote a declaration called the Seneca Falls Sentiment, based on, interestingly enough, the Declaration of Independence. And of course, right now we're commemorating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration. So it's very interesting to read the initial sentiment that created the League of Women Voters. And it was simply based on the fact that at that time, women had been left out of every possible power position. And really not just power, but even in terms of having their own agency, being able to own property, being able to make decisions. And at that point, the women who are our wonderful ancestors, on whose shoulders we stand, said enough, basically, and began a very long journey. And like any activism campaign, you know, I think if you could see at the beginning how long it was going to take you to get to the end, you might not have taken that first step. Classic truth, right? And so that began, though, a journey that persisted through an extraordinary story of activism, of sacrifice, of gathering momentum, until finally, in August of 1920, this country passed the 19th Amendment and gave women the right to vote. And interestingly enough, the League itself was formed before the 19th Amendment was passed. It was formed actually in February. February 14th, we celebrate Valentine's Day by celebrating the League of Women Voters.
The official name.
As the official name, we became the League of Women Voters with the intention of looking at these now some 18 million women who were all of a sudden gaining the franchise. And so how will they do with that agency? So it was formed to actually educate us on how to engage then in the political process. There is a wonderful story, and I don't know if you all know it, about the actual 19th Amendment, the final state
the final vote on the final state.
vote on the final state, because ratify the amendment it took 3/4 of the states to ratify. And the final debate was happening in the Tennessee House, the legislature. And they had actually had 2 votes. It was stalled. It was 48 to 48, and they were actually voting to table it when a young man whose mother had sent him a letter, literally the day of, he stood on the floor of the Tennessee Senate with his mother's letter in his pocket, saying basically, my mother told me to do this, and he cast, Harry T. Barnes, he cast the deciding vote that actually pushed Tennessee over the edge, and in the end then led to the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Amazing story.
That is amazing. And he did what his mom asked him to.
He did what his mother said. So,
It's certainly interesting that while we're named the League of Women Voters, we are open to all genders, and we welcome the advocacy on any topic, because we definitely believe that women and everybody, all the issues are women's issues. All the issues are people issues. It's really important to know that we have a broad base of advocacy.
Now, once that 19th Amendment was codified into law, the struggle didn't end there. There were elements of opposition that the League and other people had to face. Can you share some of that with us?
The opposition has actually never stopped.
Well,
I mean,
yes.
when you look at, in our country, access to voting rights, that fight has been going on for a very long time. But when the 19th Amendment was passed, the truth is it didn't give all women the right to vote. It did not give black women the right to vote. It did not give indigenous Americans the right to vote. It didn't give Asian Americans the right to vote. And so those battles continued, and it really wasn't until the 20s that indigenous Americans, women, received the right to vote. And it wasn't until 1943, I think, that Asian Americans were given the right to vote. So that battle has gone on, and then right up until 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act that finally gave us some teeth to really including everyone in the franchise. And of course, and I know we'll talk about it, the battle continues today.
I was going to say that has not ended by any means. And it was odd to see that a century later, more than a century later, that there is a opposition effort to repeal that 19th Amendment. It's led by a pastor, I believe, based in Moscow, Idaho, named Doug Wilson, and he's trying to disenfranchise essentially half of the voting population. Do you view this as a sideshow, or do you take it as a serious threat?
I think any threat to voting rights is a serious threat.
Okay.
And I think I would say, yes, that effort is happening, but I would actually move that to a much larger effort that's happening today, I think, to disenfranchise many voters in this country. And there are reasons for that, and I know we'll talk about it, but one of them is certainly a fear, a false narrative that folks who shouldn't be voting are voting. And so it is interesting to see, yes, once again, or continuingly, women are our capacity to have agency is being threatened. But really, I think that's part of a much larger effort to turn back a number of the hard-fought rights that we have.
We might just touch on that right now, because there are some other issues relating to challenges, et cetera. But this narrative that continues to be trotted out, that there are people voting that should not be voting. You do a lot of research as part of the organization. What does your research show?
Well, first of all, we want to applaud anyone who wants safe and secure elections. That's something that we work for and want everybody to feel like they can vote. And we want access to the ballot. So we have looked at the research, and it turns out that non-citizens voting is extraordinarily rare. The Brennan Center did a study that showed 30 votes out of 23 million were questioned. Our own Secretary of State, we asked them, the Washington Secretary of State, we asked them, well, were there any issues in the 2024 elections? They said, we had 200 ballots that were questioned, and they were caught in the process, and they were dealt with, and moved on. So that's an extremely small percentage, and the system caught it. So we're of the mind that because it is so rare, that we shouldn't do anything to increase the barriers to voting. So that's why we've taken a position on Initiative 500. That's an initiative for the people that's trying to get signatures right now, and we're opposing it. And we have a strong
This is in the state of
decline
Washington.
in the state of Washington.
Tell us a little bit about that. if you
Yeah,
seem to have
so
brought that up.
so this initiative is talking from this fear that you brought up, is talking about adding requirements to when you register to vote, and adding the fact that anyone who hasn't already proven their citizenship would have to go back to their auditors and show documents. And this is going to add a tremendous burden to people all across the state for lots of reasons. Women or anybody who've changed their name since their since their birth. Working people, that what a burden on time to go find your documents and take them to the appropriate channels and show that. So we're very opposed because we see this as a problem that doesn't exist, and adding these barriers, we want every eligible voter to vote.
And that initiative sounds like it's at least along the lines of what's been portrayed or called the SAVE Act, I believe, on the federal level. Where is that at right now? And perhaps talk about the dangers if that were to be passed in terms of voter participation.
Sure, and I can jump a little bit in on that one. The SAVE Act is there's actually a suite of acts that have been introduced at the national level in Congress that would require this proof of citizenship, that would also require states to share their voter records, a whole series of requirements that currently don't exist and I would say are not needed. It did pass the House and moved to the Senate. And at the Senate, they do not have the votes to actually to pass the act. So, and I will tell you, part of the reason that that's true is that organizations like the League of Women Voters mobilized a huge number of supporters across the country. So working in partnership with Common Cause and other organizations to really let Congress and the Senate know that we oppose this. And so at the moment, it's dead at the moment. It can be revived at any time. It depends on what happens with, it's actually a filibuster issue, but they don't have the votes to move this ahead. So at the moment, that is happily not one of the things we have to be worrying about. And it really took voters across the country paying attention to this issue and saying, no, this makes no sense, to actually stop it. So, but we are watching it, the League in particular is watching it very closely, and if it looks like it's going to rise again, we will actually be motivating our members and our supporters to say no.
And the additional threat right now is the threat to mail-in voting.
Yes.
Right.
So vote by mail in Washington State, we love it. We want to keep it, right? Yet there are forces out there that say that it's not secure, and it is. We've seen that through all of the work with the Secretary of State over the years. So there is a Supreme Court case right now that's going to be decided by the end of this term, Watson v. RNC, and that could significantly hinder our mail-in ballot because it could come out with, when is your mail-in ballot legal? And if it's not legal after Election Day, like we've been used to having that grace period after Election Day, we're going to have to get the word out that you got to get your ballot in early. Use those drop boxes, right? The United States Postal Service has now changed its processes. So I love this story. Someone who drops their ballot in a Postal Service box in Wenatchee, a block from the auditor's office, it could take 10 days to 2 weeks to get it to go to Spokane, get stamped, and come back because of that new process. So we don't want, we want everybody's ballot to be counted. So get them in early, use the drop boxes.
Isn't one of the ironies that one of the people that have raised issues about this, the president himself, and yet he votes by mail?
He evidently does vote by mail.
My family gets that voter pamphlet, talks about the candidates around the kitchen table. Now we have time to think about it, discuss it, look something up, decide how you're going to vote in the comfort of your own home. Let's use it. Let's not forget that ballot tucked under the paper.
Very good.
We want to let everybody know that all the auditors' offices are open to tour, so you can see before or during ballot processes, you can see it happening, and you can see, I know in Pierce County, we've got watchers, so they have independent folks. Ours, D's, and League participates in the nonpartisan part to be watchers, just to add an added, like, oh, yeah, I got this. They got this. This is going good.
I think this is a really important point, because I think at the root of so many of these petitions and initiatives is this fundamental sense that somehow our elections aren't safe, or they're not secure, or that something nefarious is going on. And the truth is, we have the most transparent, accurate processes. And so the League does a lot of work inviting people into those processes. I know I live in Snohomish County, and Snohomish County Auditor 2 years ago just actually rebuilt their election center, and it is, anyone can tour it, and they actually have a walkway that goes all the way around, full windows, floor to ceiling.
Really?
And at any time, you can go and you can watch anything that is happening in that. It is completely transparent. And to Allison's point, folks don't know this, before every election, and actually during every election, all of the machinery is tested and processed. There are mandated tests that every auditor's office goes through to make sure their equipment is counting ballots correctly. And the public is invited to watch those tests. And the League does that. The League sort of, we see ourselves as the eyes and ears. We literally will sit in every county where there's a League, and we will watch those tests. And I've loved watching both League members and others go to those tests and ask tough questions, and you just see their eyes open saying, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, so I really want people to know that you can trust our election systems here in Washington State.
I had the privilege of inviting, we had about 30 high school students come and take this tour, right? And they were great. They were like, they're asking the elections people all sorts of questions, and we got 5 new people to sign up to vote,
to
register to vote. They could do it right there because they were at the elections office, right?
When we were talking about some of the challenges on a legislative nature, and then we sort of migrated into some of the judicial issues, there was the recent decision by the Supreme Court, Louisiana v. Calais, I believe it was called. If you could just briefly unpack that for us and tell us about your concerns about that decision and the impact it's going to have.
So this Supreme Court case, Louisiana v. Calais, is at the surface about Louisiana's congressional districts. Originally, when we last did the census and redistricting for this cycle, Louisiana, who has 6 congressional seats, created a map that was 5 bars, 1D, and 1 black majority district. And even though Louisiana's population is 33% black. So several citizens sued to say, hey, we're a third black, we only have 1 representative that is the one we choose. And that decision went through the courts, and the court decided, yeah, that needs to be rectified. So they created a map that had 2 black majority districts. Those maps got challenged.
Right.
So those, Mr. Calais and other white voters challenged the 4-2 map, and it went up to the Supreme Court, and they decided, yes, it was a racial gerrymander. And that's where we sit now, where Louisiana is trying to sort out what's next. The undercurrent of this is the systematic dismantling of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. We saw it in court cases before now, but this one basically gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which has for years and years been the major tool for communities of color to rectify not having the opportunity to vote in their candidate of choice.
Didn't the Supreme Court justices, at least some of them that voted with a majority on that, say that essentially the problems that led to that and a lack of representation on the part of minority voters, black voters, were no longer an issue. Is that correct? And if so, what's your view as a lead from that?
It's part of the false explanation in my mind.
Right.
The fact that we have made strides and that there are examples of black people getting elected in majority white districts, right? That doesn't undermine the extreme challenge it is for groups, especially in Louisiana or Alabama, right? Where to get the representation that they want. I go back to the Shelby v. Holder decision that took away the pre-clearance possibility of the Voting Rights Act. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was famous to say, right, her quote is, just because you're not getting wet when you're holding an umbrella doesn't mean the umbrella has to go away. The tools we had in place were working. It was advancing folks, and it was putting out there more opportunity to vote or to elect candidates of your choice.
One of the statistics that grabbed me, and I suspect it troubles you greatly, is when you look at the level of voter participation in this country. I think it's in the 30% range, and yet you see some of the European nations, I think we rank 31st out of 35 Western democracies, and there are many countries in Europe that are 70, 80% participation rates. Why do you think that's so low?
I appreciate that you raised that issue, because it really is a concern for all of us in the sort of the voting and democracy space. I think there are a number of reasons for it. I think we actually have disenfranchised a number of voters for so many years. If you don't feel seen, and if you don't see yourself in your representatives, it's very hard for you to feel that your vote can make a difference. We would argue, of course it can, and the only way we'll change that is, in fact, for you to participate. I also think there's been a concerted effort to, in fact, build distrust in our systems, and that plays out in people not getting involved. It's interesting because when you look at, of course, the numbers change when it's a presidential election year. Right here in Washington State, I mean, the numbers are true. In our last year's election, which was local elections, I mean, it was city councils and school boards and mayors and all of that, which are critical races. I mean, these are the representatives closest to you and I that are making real decisions about my water and my roads and my schools. The participation was less than 40% statewide. It's extraordinary to me that 60% of the folks did not choose to participate. So, but in a presidential year, that number, of course, jumps up tremendously. So we have work to do, I think, to help people understand the power of their vote. Now, there are other things involved in that issue. As an example, if you look at the decline in local journalism and what's happening really across this nation with our loss of local newspapers in general, the consolidation in the market, as that has happened, people are seeing more and more one-voice national issue reporting. And when you lose local reporting, this is exactly what happens. People no longer participate in their democracy. We don't have the watchdogs looking. Actually, the cost of government goes up. It's very interesting. There's distrust and fewer people vote. It's just simply so. There are so many factors involved in this. And interestingly enough, I will say the League is fighting on all of those levels. I don't know if you read it, but a couple of years ago in Washington, League of Women Voters did a study talking about the decline in local journalism and its effect on democracy. Wonderful study that really, actually disturbing to the extent that you look at the number, the loss.
Well, you just look at, I think one of the statistics is that over the last 20 years, and it might be even shorter period of that, 3,000 local newspapers have folded. And we just even look in the Seattle area where we're sitting and doing the interview, we used to have at least 2 of the 3 local television stations were locally owned. And now that's no longer the case.
The League has been working on legislation in Washington State, actually, to see if we can, in fact, hold these large data providers accountable to pay for the information that they are scraping and using that is actually resulting in a loss of local journalism. So we're working on legislation that might be able to have one remedy around at least bringing more revenue and resources into the journalism market.
From the advocacy side,
Yes.
one of the things the League is most proud of is that we got civic education required back into the high schools.
Yes.
So now
Yes.
you cannot graduate high school with at least one semester of civics.
Yes,
So
yes.
people know the basics. And I've personally been in some of those classrooms.
Yes.
And these young people don't know who their representatives are. They don't know the difference between our state government and Congress, right? And those are, and I didn't when I was young, right? So those are the things we've got to get out there. And the League has had a textbook in many of the schools. And I'll let Karen know that you know more of the specifics about
yeah,
the
let me talk
textbook.
about it. We actually produce a series of textbooks. It's called The State We're in, Washington. They are produced for 3rd through 5th graders and for middle schoolers. 2 different editions. There's a Spanish edition. There are teacher guides that go along with it. This was actually created by League members. They're now used in over 45 school districts across the state. More than 100 teachers are using that resource. And in fact, we just did a survey and they're highly regarded. So we are committed to, it's sort of walking our talk, that yes, we
Right.
need civic education, so we're going to give you tools that can actually help you get there.
There's no question that there is so much more we could explore. But
It's a big topic,
The time,
isn't
it's a
it?
big topic, and I'm looking at the clock, and our allowable time is up. But I know this is not going to be an issue that's going to go away. So I hope you'll both agree to come back sometime as this issue continues to evolve and be guests on our program again. Well, thank you both so much, and thank you for tuning into this episode of Challenge 2.0.